I was offered a chance to give this master's presentation many months ago. I decided I'd cheat a little bit and try and revive one I'd done before that I'd given 5 or 6 times in other clubs. It was loaded with a great deal of content from textbooks, and it was boring as hell. I decided I had to go beyond that. So this time I chose to base it on what my business partner and I teach in workshops. I very quickly realized that this was not textbook stuff, but it did require a great deal of introspection on what I did. And it slowly dawned on me that part of it was going to be about my journey in photography. It's also heavily based on someone who travels solo a great deal and loves landscape photography. By the way, I'm a liberal arts guy, so there will be no numbers in this presentation. In grade school, English composition was the first time I'd ever heard composition before. In my 20s, I got into classical music appreciation, and I heard music composition. Photographic composition didn't enter my mind to somewhere in my 60s. So the progression's pretty simple. Originally, composition for me was where I pointed the camera. Next, what am I pointing at? Then started to read the camera manual, and I started taking off my training wheels. Then, unfortunately, I started to learn Photoshop, and I realized I had a mad scientist located in me that wanted to do all sorts of fun stuff in Photoshop. Then a little bit of reality and paranoia set in when I started wondering whether anyone beyond my family liked my stuff. The next step was even scarier. Why did they like it? And then I found out I was far more emotional about my stuff than I was willing to admit. And this was the beginning of some serious gut checking time. Yes, can I take criticism? And the answer to that is yes, no, yes, no. But it all started to really come together. And this list got changed around a little bit. And I found that I had become a student of shooting and post-production. My work is liked enough to feed my ego. I really felt I was slowly improving. I care and I'm committed. And criticism, maybe on a good day, means I'm just not communicating. I realized I'd sort of found my groove, that I was good enough with what I did. I became calmer. I listened better. I was just as passionate, and maybe I could have others find their groove. So what we're going to talk about tonight is the creative composition process. It starts out at home, it goes in the field, and it comes back home again. At the end of the capture part, we'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll have our first Q&A for about 10 minutes. So, preparation. Preparation tends to be the most overlooked step. I believe it is the major contributor to missed opportunities and to bad images. It involves checking your state of mind and thoughts. It has to do with your equipment readiness. And once you get to the site, how you're prepared to go. And for all major trips I take, I have a trip folder that goes with it. Preparation and leadership, or thought leadership. There are certain places we can get this. We can walk in with no knowledge. We can, if we are a local, feel right at home. Or you could go with a group of people that lead, such as my partner and myself. Or you can get really smart fast by doing research. The first time I went to Mono Lake, my wife and I drove down the road from Lee Vining, and we parked and walked through the high underbrush. And lo and behold, I saw another bunch of photographers, all with their tripods out. So I quickly got mine out and started shooting like mad. That night, we got back and started looking at one another's pictures. And I didn't realize that my wife had walked around the corner from where I was, and she was on the eastern side of the Tufa towers and had gotten some incredibly wonderful pictures. Well, lack of learning didn't put me where she was, and I paid the price. Todd's Point is a spit of land going out into Long Island Sound, and it's pretty close to where I grew up. I fished, I crabbed, I did sailing down there, etc. And with local knowledge, I knew that twice a year with the spring and fall tides at their peak, you could see a wreck in the harbor that was about 8 feet under. And if you weren't a local, you didn't know about it. For North Dakota, this will be, I guess, our 6th year of going up there. And my partner and I put a lot of time into it. It's a big state, and there really aren't a lot of good references. But through a lot of work, a lot of reference work, we found a lot of places we could take people to. Last year, we ran a trip to Colorado. We stayed in Gunnison, which is sort of halfway across the state. And while I was in a bar, well, we all were for dinner, I befriended a local photographer, and he told me about a place that was 3 miles behind Gunnison, and it was a bunch of rocks on an elevation. And it turned out that no one except a photographer knew about it, and it was an amazing place to shoot sunset and an even better place to shoot astral later on. The first time I went to the Wave, which was, I want to say 15 or 18 years ago, it wasn't as popular as it is now. And unfortunately, we had a guy who was with us, not as a guide, but as just an average guy who had been there before. And he had a GPS. Now, getting to the Wave, as some of you probably know, is about a 45-minute drive, and then depending on your strength and what the weather's like, anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour walk on slick rock. We got there, we set up our tripods, and all of a sudden we had snow. Yes, it was February, but there was a lot of snow, and we got whited out. And as a result, if it hadn't have been for this guy having the proper tools, we could have been in a world of trouble. So when you are going places out of town, make sure you figure out who you're going with and who knows what's going on. And again, what I'm talking about is location intelligence. I think all of us would probably jump to using Google, but there's a lot of other really good resources. You can go to various sites and you can actually contact the photographer who did the image and find out about the place they've been. There's a new movement afoot, of course, in social media, not to say exactly where it occurred because it gets trampled, but you can still get a general idea. There are gems to find. Most of you don't know it, but I'm gaga about lighthouses. And this Lighthouse Friends site is absolutely amazing. I found it quite by accident. And all of the states in blue have lighthouses. The ones in yellow don't. No surprise. But if I were to click on Michigan, you will see all of the lighthouses in the state of Michigan. A piece of trivia for you: Michigan has more lighthouses than any other state in the country. If you click on one of these little lighthouses, and this is just so slick, it brings up history, it brings up images, and all sorts of data. So there are things like this that you can use that are really helpful. Google Earth. This is a shot of North Dakota. I don't know how high we are, but it will show you points of interest, and it will also show you where people have shot before. And for my partner and I, we did an awful lot of search, and we came up with a treasure map, if you will, of North Dakota. This isn't the main area we work in. This is the northeast corner, but we have a total of 250 different sites we can go to. So research really pays off. On your way to wherever you're going, take a chance to look in the mirror at yourself. Think of why you're going, what your health is, and any preoccupations you have on your mind. I can tell you, if you just had an argument in the house, going out and doing photography is either the best or the worst idea. Okay, some of you know I'm a little bit OCD, but this is a road-proven list of over 20 years. It tells me what sort of equipment I have to take, because I can specialize it to each time, the type of clothes I should bring. And it's just an amazing little piece to work with. And I keep it in the folder for the trip, and it's a really useful thing. Okay, so we get to the site. You have arrived. I love this saying. And be alert. Your awareness is an overlooked stepchild. Consciously commit to patience and receptivity. This is my biggest shortcoming. On arrival at where I'm going, I'm like letting the retriever out of the car next to a duck pond. Once you're out, walk around, look around, and see what's happening, see what changes are occurring. And we'll start to talk about changes right now. The first dynamic is light. We're always aware of light subconsciously, but we really have to try and be actively conscious of it when we get out of the car or get to where we're going. Its strength, its direction, its path, the clouds, moving spotlights, hard or soft lights, predictive changes. So you may have to be in a situation at sunset or sunrise where you're aware that you're going to have to change settings, not in minutes, but in seconds. The second awareness piece is sky types and clouds, because believe it or not, the cloud pattern, the speed, the direction will force you in to some of the pictures you take and some of the moods you're in. big fluffies. They lend themselves to happy pictures. Foreboding clouds, storm clouds, suggest drama or danger. I was very fortunate to get this next picture. I don't know how many of you have pictures of sky sharks, but it's a wonderful, wonderful thing if you need to replace the sky and put something in like this. Birds can contribute or hinder. They can also create, for lack of a better word, dust spots in long exposures that you may have to remove them. The moon has many personalities, and it interacts with all the variables during night and day. Coloration. Typically, coloration occurs early morning or in the evening or around storms. Pre-dawn, post-sunset, and blue hour offer wonderful shots with less hurried settings on your camera. Wind. Wind's an interesting thing to deal with. And one of the reasons, if you have a chance, you should always check forecasts. It changes, it's invisible, and sometimes when you're concentrating on your shots, you don't realize what else is happening. So it can either be a barrier or a creative element. This is one of about 30 or 40 shots I took back in Illinois of a maple tree in a heavy wind. I can't say I got any I really, really liked, but at least this is trending in the right direction. Wind also hides and reveals. It can create mystery and drama. We were in a helicopter and we had to hover for over a minute for these clouds to clear so you could see the lava below. High winds can also cause distractions. Sometimes you're trying to hang on to your equipment and your clothing and try and concentrate. I'm not really good at multitasking. No wind can create stillness, calm, and a different state of mind. The results of wind can create some wonderful shots. This one's from Bodie. This is a strange one. I just added it in about 3 days ago. There are many times when we put on a different hat when we have our camera out, whether we're shooting sports, panoramas, architecture, whether we're going in for macro or whatever. And it takes a while to adjust your mind to what you're shooting. And it's going to take just as much, if not more mind, to stop doing that and switch to another thing. Next dynamic is water. Water is probably my favorite dynamic. We're dealing with surface states. We're dealing with wave characteristics, tides, currents in river. We're dealing with spray. We're dealing with fog. This is a waterfall located in northern Wisconsin. And I typically, when I'm using or shooting water shots, I'll shoot 5 to 7 bracketed, because with all of these, I'm going to get some nuanced differences in color, shape, and texture. This was, I think, shot somewhere near Goat Rock,
but it's in that general area. And I was trying to capture a mood in the water. And very honestly, I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew I could get it if I sat there and waited and watched enough. And pictures sometimes talk to you. And if they don't talk to you when you're shooting, they certainly will talk to you in the monitor later. And I probably shot 50 or 60 there because I wanted choices. This is a lighthouse near Newport, Oregon. And there were just too many variables to take a couple of shots. The land didn't move, but the clouds did. The waves broke to the extreme left. They broke under the lighthouse and they broke on the beach. And there were lines of waves entering the inlet. I took a lot of shots because I didn't know how I was going to bring them all together. In Photoshop, I could take some waves from one and put them in another, or I could depress them. I had no idea. So again, I didn't want to superimpose what I thought I saw over what was happening. Reflectivity. That's Duluth at night. The tree is on a golf course somewhere in Illinois, and the bottom two are in South Carolina. One thing you have to remember about shooting reflections is that elevation means everything. High school physics, angle of incidence. So if you get up high, you're going to get a much different feeling than if you shoot low. The other thing to remember is that with reflections, some people, when they process, will make the water brighter than the sky. And I learned this back in the club I used to belong to. We had a guy that taught physics there, and he told us on no uncertain terms that a reflection is anywhere between 1 and 2 f-stops darker than the sky. Patience with fog and mist. This was shot outside of Jasper in Canada. I think I shot over 300 bracketed images over an hour and 45 minutes. The variables I saw was the amount of overall light coming from sunrise, where the light was directed in terms of highlights and shadows, the color of the sunrise rays, the moving clouds, the amount of fog pumping in, and the speed of the fog dissipating on the lake. And a bull elk 15 feet away from me that decided he needed a drink of water. I can't ever talk about water without talking about water safety. And I think we've probably all had experiences with slips and falls and scrapes in the tidal range or along a river. This is shot north of Cannon Beach. This is actually where the Goonies, if you remember that movie, was shot. Tide is typically a 6-hour cycle. At low water, you can walk all the way out to that rock that has a hole in the middle of it. It's the last big promontory you see, almost to the right edge. At high tide, the tide can be over 8 feet. So it's a long walk to get out there, but it's an even longer swim coming back. In general, tides vary. Around the equator, you may have a foot. In Alaska, I've seen it over 20. when you're shooting, you're sometimes shooting with a group, and you have, you name it, in terms of people in there, and you either have to work with them, isolate from them, or befriend them and work together. This was a shot of a group of us in a old hotel that hadn't been used for about 60 years. And we had one person along who was the proverbial, well, I'll be back in a minute. And we were always looking for the person. Last dynamic is equipment worry. Vigilance pays off. When I was in Alaska sea kayaking, in our group, we had probably 40% failure rate over a week because of salt spray. Salt spray and electronics don't get along well together. I've been in Death Valley where you don't even notice the grit that's in the air until towards the end of the week, you start hearing grinding noises in your telephoto. I also remember one time about, 4 years ago, when there was a heavy wind and we were at Convict Lake. And I was so amazed at 3 to 4 foot waves in Convict Lake that I didn't realize that my camera really wasn't tight on my tripod. Luckily, I had good insurance. And I've been involved in a number of tours in Chicago. And it's a big city, but it can happen anywhere where someone puts their equipment down for a minute and they turn around and they either have forgotten about it or someone likes it more than they do. And petty theft is very common. Okay, reduction. Now that you've looked around and scoped the area, it's time to zero in. It's a big, busy world out there, but the important thing, and I can't stress this enough, is what's so special to you. When we lead tours, I fully expect that out of 10 people, there will be cameras pointing in at least 6 different directions. There's no right answer to what is the right thing for you to shoot. So as you start to zero in, you sort of have to look in the mirror and say, what are your likes? What are your dislikes? What are your frustrations? What's your mobility? Are you in a place where you can't climb over rocks? Or what's your fear? You can't get near the edge to shoot down over that precipice. So what's special to me? Well, I like landscapes, flowers, people sometimes, old, rusty, dusty things. I don't shoot critters. I don't like night shots particularly because it interferes with sitting around with people with a beer in my hand. I don't like big rocks in the desert. I'm ADD. I hate shooting more than 2 hours at a time. I love pointing out stuff to other people. I love being alone every now and then and getting spiritual. And I love anything that has to do with salt water and ocean. So once you've gotten it sort of reduced to what you want to shoot, you need to define it and name it. Force yourself to narrow it down. Obviously, this guy in the picture is going to be really sure about which piece of lava he wants to shoot. So some quick examples. What looks good to you in this? What drew you to looking at this? Was it the green moss? Was it the waterfall? Was it the water flow? It can be different for everyone. The flowers. Do you like the complementary colors? Do you like the ruffles? Do you like the textures? Here we are in the Palouse. Do you like that big line that just keeps going? Do you like the hills? Do you like the crop lines? Mono Lake. Do you like the organic versus the inorganic? Do you like the implied rule of thirds? Do you like yellows and blues? Zabrinsky Point. Do you like the sense of distance, the weird landscape, the jumble, the shadows, the shapes? Or if you look closely, there's a spider web of trails that take you from up top down to the paint pots. Chicago Botanic Garden. Do you like the Asian motif? Do you like the number of diagonals? The sense of serenity? Colored gradations? Wyoming. Do you like nature versus man? The West, mountains, terrains? Do you like the big picture? Do you like the debris? The desert outside? And believe it or not, that little roadway you see there is 395 North. Okay, we've done walking around and it's now time to pull the trigger. So you have to remember that you're taking setups and shots. A setup is where you move to a location.
Just a moment. You're back. You should be back.
Okay, can you hear me? Steve?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So during capture, there's so much stuff you can do in such a small area. You walked around a large area first, and now it's time for you to start zeroing in on exactly what it is, and also look around and see what change is going on. The sky, the water, animals, change your lens, change your filters, and check after almost every shot. Well, here's something I didn't fix. Check your focus and check your histogram. So the capture philosophy I believe in is you try and make provisions for what is neither seen nor understood. And this can have to do with weather, water, behavior of animals or people, light changes, to name a few. In terms of hints, try and get it right in the camera. I'm not a proponent of getting it perfect. There isn't enough time. There really isn't. Don't take all day. Events don't wait for you. Generate more possibilities for processing later. Check focus, frame, and histogram frequently. Also, look around and see what other people are shooting. And remember, blind squirrels can't find chestnuts. If you don't understand that, I'll tell you at the end of this. So capture for me, that's me, is data collection. It's all about bracketing on the tripod. I want to get as many variables covered as I can. Storage is cheap, and I want to be able to go home with bushel baskets full of information about what I'm trying to shoot. And if I've been on a tripod and I've taken these, then I can pop in multiple ones and really get the picture I want. And I'll give you an example of this. When I was in Chicago, I saw a big headline in the weather section. Big lake storm coming. Wind at 40 to 50 miles an hour steady, 60 in gusts, waves 20 to 40 feet high. So I hopped in the car and drove around the bottom of the lake from the Chicago area to Michigan. And I built a small shelter out of PVC pipe, and I made a foxhole, and it protected me from a lot of the sand and freezing rain that was occurring. I spent over 6 hours shooting late afternoon and early morning from, I think, about 7 different locations on the beach. Believe it or not, I took over 1,500 images. I was looking to learn from the images because the dynamics of the waves were something I couldn't predict or even visualize. So what I was trying to do was to get as much of them as I possibly could. So this was from the first set of shots I took. As a point of view, just looking at this, that first lighthouse is about between 3 and 4 stories. The second one out there is between 2 and 3. That structure that goes between them, believe it or not, in the old days was used by the lighthouse keepers to get from place to place without being swept off by waves. So here's another shot that I'm looking at. Here's another one from another location. And then I got really into it. And obviously I did a lot of sorting when I got back home, but there's no way I could have predicted that the wind was going to come up over and get the waves on top of this lower lighthouse. I thought it was just amazing. And then to get one with it sort of in silhouette was probably one of my best killer shots of the day. The next morning, it was early and I could still get more pictures. And this one's really unusual from the point of view of, you see that thing that looks like a comma sort of right beyond center? That happens to be a wave that was hit by another wave that ricocheted off of the lighthouse and came back. So it was sort of like 2 hands clapping out there. So just for capture again, always remember, shoot like you're never coming back and embarrass yourself with all your things you get. There may be invisible treasures, as I showed you with those shots I just showed you. Shoot with humility. It's fine to pre-visualize what you want to get, but sit there and try and take in and find things that you didn't see before. And last, from time to time, think about leading lines, rule of thirds, color wheel, etc. When you're dealing with static shots, you have a slightly different issue, and that is you're going to take less shots, but you're going to take more setups because you want to have the ability to make final judgments when you get home on how you shot the building. Here's a barn. It was somewhere near the Montana border. And we saw this sad sight. And I was trying to figure out what angle I could shoot it from to show its prior majesty. The Palouse. Fabulous house, still in decent shape, at least to from the outside. It was a wreck inside. But I kept walking and walking and walking, and the feeling kept changing. Typically, when I shoot landscape in a place like this, when the house is small and the sky is big, it sort of connotes nature over man. Where if you look at the last image, it's the other way around and it's man over nature. At least that's how I look at it. Lighthouses. I found this lighthouse in Cape Cod, and it was only listed in one reference book. I thought I'd found a hidden gem when I got there in the morning in the dark. About 45 minutes after dawn, a policeman walked up to me and asked me if I'd like to come down to the police station and talk to them about trespassing on private property, which is a reminder to myself, maybe I didn't do all the research I should have done. Grain elevators. Back again to North Dakota. This is one of my favorite structures up there. I've shot it 5 or 6 times. Done it in the sun, done it in the shade, done it in clouds, done it in rain, and in freezing sleet. Very seldom will I find a subject so isolated with so much land around it, or with railroad tracks for leading lines. Rusty cars. This is located outside the Painted Desert. And what was going through my mind is there's got to be a good way to shoot this before I collapse from sunstroke. Abandoned churches. Yeah, we're back in North Dakota again. And I've shot this church a lot of times, but it's so kaleidoscopic due to the sky. Like the prior grain elevator, there's plenty of isolation around it, wide open vistas, and it's never the same. Sadly, it's probably going to be rubble in another 5 to 7 years. Okay, we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll go to the second half. Everyone gets unmuted. Someone can play policeman for me, and we can all start talking.
Take advantage of the break.
Hey, Tony, this is Greg.
Hey, Greg.
Good job on time management. I'm really impressed.
I am too.
I love those lighthouses in the storm. My God,
Yeah,
those are
they were
great.
beautiful.
Right.
But, you know, what I'm trying to tell you is if you get into dynamics like that, anyone can shoot images like that because you've taken enough of them that you're going to have a variety to pick and choose.
Mhm. And dig a bunker in the sand.
Actually, I did. I thought I was going to get arrested for that, but I didn't.
Mhm.
And growing up in the Great Lakes, we all know, never underestimate the storms and the waves on the lakes. They rival anything on the ocean.
Steve, I not only grew up on the water, but I was in the Navy. And the Great Lakes, from my point of view, are probably the most dangerous piece of water I've ever been on.
Aren't there more shipwrecks there than anywhere?
I don't know that. It was really interesting. There's a place called the Upper Peninsula, which is a place right along the Canadian border. And I've actually been within 3 miles of where the Edmund Fitzgerald went down.
There's a famous sailing race that goes from Chicago to Mackinac.
Yeah, I've done it.
And some years ago, what was it, the cup race? A sailor from Australia was going, oh, it's just a lake. And midway through the race, a storm came up, snapped his mainsail, wiped him out of the race, and he said, I will never call it just a lake again.
Steve, actually, in that race, 14 sailboats were dismasted and 3 people were killed.
Wow.
And that's out of, it's 300 and some miles long. And I think there's close to 220 boats that participate.
I liked your lighthouse friends information, the map. That was
Yeah.
great. Nice link. Thank you for sharing it.
Mhm.
Oh, you're welcome. I've given presentations on lighthouses, and it's amazing how many people go, oh, I found it sheer by luck.
I'm watching YouTube videos about half dozen photographers in the world. I can't compare, you know.
Sounds like someone's talking in the background.
Do you have any other questions from the first half? We got
No,
some
we
time.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So where are you going to go anywhere this soon or until
You know-
COVID's over?
We have a couple of trips planned, but very honestly, unless I can drive there, I'm not sure I want to go there. I feel safer in my car than I do in a plane right now.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Agreed.
you know, I don't feel I'm unusual from anyone in the club. We all sort of have a target painted on our back because of age.
Except Nick. Except Nick. Where's Nick?
Where's that youngster?
Hey, Mark, are you there? I guess he's not.
I'm here. I was on mute. I'm
Oh,
really
okay.
enjoying this. I like the pace.
Oh.
First one I've attended.
Oh,
Right.
well, good. I'm sort of the welcoming committee for new people. So if you get a chance, give me a call and I'll sort of walk you through some of the club stuff and critique images for you.
Great. Love it. I really am enjoying this.
Where do you live?
Santa Rosa.
Santa Rosa?
And yeah, I'll be honest. I've been watching the great courses, Fundamentals of Photography. I got through the first one and I'm on the second. And honestly, I'm finding this even more valuable. So.
Well, it's what we teach, and I honestly believe it's the hardest thing for the photographer to learn.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and I was really interesting going through your different photos and taking one subject and seeing them in such different lights. Like the very last one, the church, each one was very different.
Yeah,
Each one
that's-
told a different story. That was really interesting to me.
it's amazing. One of the most wonderful things about North Dakota, and what drew it to me originally, was the fact that Ansel Adams had never been there. I can't tell you what happened to me. The first time I went to Yosemite, my wife and I were about to leave, and I said, "Hey, there's a little parking spot right here, and it looks like there's a river." So I got out, got my tripod set up, and I said, "God damn it. It's the Merced and El Capitan." You know, trying to replicate a master is not a good thing.
No.
So when you talk about that church, you literally can walk around that church almost a quarter mile out, just like that grain elevator.
Yeah.
And I have some shots of that grain elevator, and I was using a 100-400 with a teleextender on it. And I was shooting it easy half-mile away.
Yeah. I've been there once, and it's such a photographic place. I mean, there's so many little abandoned areas,
Yeah.
schools and half abandoned towns, and
Yep.
Very interesting. When I think of North Dakota, I'll tell just a very short story. That's still a sore spot with my wife, but I wanted to go to all 50 states, and we're going to South Dakota. I go, honey, I really want to go to North Dakota. She says, it's 2 hours out of the way. And I go, please. And I begged, and she wouldn't relent. And she fell asleep, and I gunned it. And she woke up and goes, where are we? And I said, North Dakota.
And you still married?
She hates the story. I love telling it, though, as you can tell.
You're gonna fit right in, Mark.
That's called
But I
great.
loved it. I would love to go back because of that. I mean, it just everywhere you went were scenes like you were showing.
Yeah.
So
How are
Well,
the
I don't-
locals?
I did-
We
yeah.
have a mole in North Dakota. He is someone who's responsible for getting rid of bugs, and his name is Bugman, and he is either directly related or knows someone to almost anyone who lives in the state. So he's been an amazing help to us, and really encyclopedic knowledge. But it's really different when I've gone down and done shooting in the Carolinas. I'm still considered a Yankee.
Mm.
Connecticut Yankee.
Oh, okay. I thought I'd lost all my accent, but I've been told by people in Minnesota I haven't. Anyway,
You ever been to Mitchell, South Dakota, the Corn Palace?
no, I haven't.
It's intriguing.
Yes.
Steve, do we have most people back?
Are you ready to start up again?
Oh, sure. It's already past my bedtime.
Okay, I will mute everyone, and I will turn the spotlight back to you. Let's see.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, so I guess I can start. Steve?
yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay, we've done our shooting and we're going back home to debrief, to select, and to communicate. These are our chores that are left. Download, sort, format cards, save and toss, pre-process, reprocess, and save and store. So we need ironclad systems for downloading. We want to have vigilance to take a look at our cards and camera to make sure that everything's working right. You already know you have the good information off the cards, but you want to check them over physically to make sure that nothing's bent, and you want to make sure that your camera's operating right. If anyone's curious about where this is located, it's at the Fermi Labs in Illinois.
A huge accelerator.
Yes, as a matter of fact, this shot is from the same place. So the first thing we do, or the first thing I do, which I'd recommend, is to go through all the images that you've downloaded very quickly. It allows you to toss the sure errors, and it allows you to look at trends in terms of what you're shooting, how you're shooting. Periodically, I'll get into things where I'm not shooting wide enough or I'm having focus issues. Sometimes you get photo bombed by good things occurring that you didn't even see the first time around. And then you'll get into some sort of provisional ranking. You can use color, numbers, or whatever. And you get really scientific about it, where picture is either good, wow, or iffy. Backups. I think we all know horror stories, but one of the saddest I've ever heard was of a couple who were in their 70s. They'd shot all their life and they got some ransomware and they lost every one of their images and $500 in cash. So when it comes to backup on the computer, backup on externals, backup to the cloud, and make sure it's mandatory. I'm often asked, in terms of backups, what I use, and I use Backblaze, B-A-C-K-B-L-A-Z-E. It's about the best I could find for the price, and it does it automatically. So you don't even have to think about it. So now that you've downloaded, you format your cards, and as I said before, you look, one of the first things you can look at is you go, what's that spot in the sky? And that's another thing to put in your folder of notes, clean the sensor. So how you process is up to your own ability. You can go from global to pixel level. In terms of minimum work, you can crop, lighten, darken, and saturate. In terms of the broad global, like on Lightroom, you can deal with tonality, coloration, but if you want to get down to really granular corrections at the pixel level, you're probably going to have to go to something like Photoshop. And for plugins, you get ones for HDR, you get it for sharpening, for noise, and things like luminosity masking. So the processing objective is a refinement of communication. What do you want the viewer to see and feel that you saw and felt? I like to think of it sort of like going to the opera. And who's the diva or the subject? How will you decorate the person on the stage? So along the way, take some raw images part way, and sometimes they'll lead you to what it's going to look like in the end. This isn't the opposite of pre-visualization, but what it is a curiosity to see what can be revealed. And it's also a little bit of humility that you don't know everything. Pick out one or two to fully optimize, do some more, and then save some of the outtakes. Further refinement, check your focus. Someone once called it gardening, and I'll stick with it. It's where you may have a limb sticking out into where you don't want it. You could have a big shiny something or other at someone's foot. There's a lot of things that can distract. And then start doing some provisional crops. I can think of situations with one of the people I was helping on getting ready for competition. And we looked at this image, and we probably could have cropped it 24 ways, but we settled on 3 or 4. For enhancement, you can also take focus and not put it everywhere. This can be done in camera, but it also can be done in post. Tonality, texture, and color are the same way. So the refinement tools are sometimes the basic editor that came with your camera. It could be Lightroom or something like that. And for me, it's Photoshop, because you can probably do more things with it that are nuanced, complicated, and expensive. And as someone told me before, there are 7.3 ways of solving any problem in Photoshop. That's me. And now I'm just going to show you a couple of shots of before and after, and I'll tell you what I did. Cannon Beach in Oregon, pretty monochromatic, pretty early in the morning. Mainly by dodging and burning, I was able to lighten the water, add contrast to the sky, and enhance the texture on the rocks and the sand and the mussels and the snails. Well, we're back to North Dakota, another one of my favorite churches. Again, you're dealing with monochromatic conditions, but you got a wonderful leading line. Afterwards, I got rid of the buildings, the pole, the cows, and a little trick. When you get rid of the buildings on the right, you need something to put back in there. And what I did was to shoot a little farther to the right than where those buildings were. And I was able to take a horizon from farther away and strip it into where the buildings were. I also used curves and contrast on the sky and added a blur layer to soften it up. I texturized the church and the grass mainly by using curves again. This is a lake north of Durango. I love the trees, but there was too much stuff around them, and I wanted to simplify the image. So basically, I only did two things. I cropped it, and I plussed up on the yellow, and I had a shot I really liked. This is the Disney Auditorium down in LA. Pretty dull. This is what it looked like afterwards. I used Photoshop, Lumenzia for luminosity layers. I used Nik and Luminar and Lightroom color calibration to pull out the colors and tonality. This is Mount Sneffels. We all called it Mount Snuffles. It was a majestic shot, but it was really sleepy. It just didn't pop at all. Here's what it looked like after about 2 hours of work, where I worked to pull color, tonality, and focus and texture up. Most of it was done using layers and curves. Some of it was done with HSL layers and selective focusing at the end. Bodhi on a high contrast day, perfect for drama and black and white. This was all done with, I think somewhere between 5 and 7 curves layer to pull up tonal depth. North Dakota, a posted house that did not have a sign up when we drove by. We're manic about not trespassing. It's a very small community. And we'd never seen a building like this before with a piano in good shape. The light was outstanding. To fix it up, use the clone tool to clean up the room a little bit, and then emphasize the reflected light on the back window with some levels adjustments. I was asked by a restaurant owner to take some Chardonnay grapes and put them on the cover of the menu. Had real problems because it was a very narrow menu, but I was able to fix it by serious cropping, using Photoshop curves to increase the translucence, and HSL for increasing the yellow. Let's see, this was in south central Wisconsin. I thought it was a good capture. It was the first shot of the day. And I really liked it, but it didn't pop. So what I had to do was do some work on it. This is basically HSL and curves layers. And then I accentuated the fog a little bit with a paintbrush. What to hold and what to fold. It's really interesting that with the passage of time, our objectivity changes too. It's real easy to go back to our old pictures and say, boy, they're not as good as our new ones are. The fact of the matter is, many times it's a Pavlovian situation where an image reminds us of the smell, the sounds, and everything else that was occurring around us. And new images tend to be real good at that, and we tend to be a little bit biased. So what I suggest is when you get new images, let them sit for a bit. Next, get second opinions on stuff. Go in competitions, judge shows, social media. And then constantly look at them and only keep the ones that have promise to them. Storage personalities. There's the pack rat. I actually had a friend of mine in Chicago that kept everything he shot. And he was a guy that would go in the field with 2 D1 cameras. And I actually think he ended up with a red camera too. And he had 1.5 petabytes of data. Then there's someone at the other extreme I know who's only keeps things that have meddled or done well. So I very comfortably fall someplace in between. And I also, every year, try and get rid of 10% of my image. I'm also a realist enough to know that as of next February, I have another big year. And it has a 0 in it. I won't tell you which one it is. But I have a lot more stuff in my rearview mirror than I do in my windshield. And I'm also trying to figure out what should happen to my images later. So for storage and organization, if there's 10 people in the room, you'll have 11 different ways to do it. There is no right way to keep your stuff. The right way is the one that works for you. Keywording is absolutely essential. And that's why I really recommend you're using Lightroom. My wife can walk into the room and say, can you give me a shot of a flower that's light pink? And I can be a smart ass and turn around and say, would one of these 15 work? It's that fast, it's that good. 2 other things, don't use a lot of catalogs. That can only get you in trouble. Try and stay with 1 or a max of 2. Lastly, use the cloud. This is virtually the only way in certain fire or seismic conditions that you can keep all of your images. Okay, closing observation. The more you know about post-processing, the more you can imagine what you want to get during the capture and how to maybe process it. Critique and competition. It's not easy to have your stuff critiqued. It's sort of like someone walking in and saying you did a lousy job with your eldest kid. It's an absolute necessity, and it forces you to get outside of yourself and make yourself more even-handed. And it's a commitment to part of the journey of finding out who you are and how good your stuff is. So we're all unique. We've all taken different paths to get to today. And our photography should reflect this and our images. So the steps that I went through with you tonight, preparation, arrival, reduction, definition, capture, communication, feedback, all contribute to making you better. And remain a student. Believe that our photography is not the product, but it is really just part of the journey. So the most important one of all, have fun, be yourself. And now a word from our sponsors, Keith and Tony Workshops. You know which one I am. Keith is the other one. He's an ex-Marine combat pilot. He's owned a camera store. He has a studio, and the two of us together are terrific. And for those of you that had spent any time with me in critiques or other, you'll know that most people think we're brothers. We're both bad news. What we offer are both trips and remote instruction. Now, we've already had to cancel one trip to the Oregon coast. We don't know if we're going to be able to pull off North Dakota or the Oregon coast or the Shawnee National Forest. We're just going to have to be sort of like Governor Newsom says, we have to look at the data. If you're interested, you can get our websites. 132 slides. Thank you, and any final questions?
Can you go back and show the previous slide because I missed your information? Thank you.
I have a question about your catalog for Lightroom. You say you use only one. How big is your catalog?
It used to be a lot bigger. I think I've got it down. I think I probably only have about 60,000 images in it.
How many?
60,000.
How many gigs?
That is on a 4 terabyte drive.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions?
This is Mark. I wrote down 3 as you were talking. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
I'll just zip through them, and if you could just answer them. One was, again, I'm watching this Fundamentals of Photography. On the storage, he voices a lot of concern about changing format and technology over the years, and that what we do today will have to be converted in some manner. And then he said the only way you can be safe is to print. And I was having a hard time relating to what he was saying. Is that a concern of yours, that the technology today is going to evolve so quickly that all the photos we're taking become obsolete, impermanent?
I'm going to be a smartass.
Yeah.
And say that probably no one will want my stuff. So I'm not going to worry about it.
So he's talking many years out, probably.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
you know, on the long run, the sun's going to go and we're all going to be in a ice planet.
Second question I had, and just your thoughts. I'm again fairly new to this, but one of the things I'm amazed by is, and they can all be the same subject, same conditions, everything, but on one day all my photos look like crap, and on other days everything's just amazing. And I've never been able to pin down what those factors are. Have you experienced that, and have you come to any conclusions about that? It's really weird to me, and I don't quite understand. Yeah.
I think the easiest answer, and it's an old saying, and that is get in front of better shit. Meaning, if you're at some majestic place, it's a little bit hard to take a bad picture.
Yeah.
But sometimes I feel as if the hairs on the back of my neck are sticking up and I am totally in the groove and I'm not going to take a bad picture. Other days I'm sleepwalking and I can't help it. So there's a variability of me.
Yeah. Interesting. And maybe this is for everybody, but I'm not quite time-wise to the Photoshop stage and all that. Is there a good intermediate photo editor that's fairly easy, fairly quick, that
I
you'd
would
recommend without going all the way to Photoshop?
I think the easiest one that offers the most for the money is Lightroom, because you're going to be able to catalog everything with
Okay.
keywords.
Yeah. I agree.
I would suggest getting Luminar for trying different processing. They do a combination. You can do their looks, or you can do it by yourself. I use a combination. I do many layers, and I would suggest it not for their cataloging. I would suggest whatever one you want to use, like Lightroom, say, but I like to use Luminar, and it's easy to do.
Got it.
I totally agree with you. I think Luminar, with its AI intelligence, can do some magic things.
I'm actually doing a picture as we're talking on Luminar that from a number of years ago that I go, oh, I don't like that. I'm going to start over. And just as we were doing this talking thing, I just kind of doing it in the background. I'm like, why not?
Nancy, you're the one that keeps all your images, right?
I keep all of my images.
You're the top list.
Except I don't have 600,000 images. I have 500,000 images.
Okay.
And it's
minimalist.
It's on 4 different drives. You know, like, I don't know, some of them are 2 terabyte, 4 terabyte. Now I think I have 8 terabytes, so they're going to get moved over. But I also have 3 backups of all of that.
Yep.
One is local. One I take off-site, and the other one is to alternate taking off-site, so that the last 2 go, and it goes. It's like it's a number of hours away from here is where they go, and I don't think I could do that way. I think I have too many.
All I can tell you,
Mark?
Yes.
All I can tell you
I was
is,
going to ask you. Oh, go ahead, Tony.
all I can tell you is the horrible sinking feeling of when you feel you've lost something, either through stupidity or through dropping a drive or something like that. And you can't blame anyone. And that's horrible.
What I was going to ask, Mark, is are you familiar with layers and masks?
No.
Okay, so probably what Nancy is suggesting, starting with Luminar, might be a good way to start. But eventually, I think you want to go to Lightroom because that'll offer you so many options.
To what?
Lightroom.
Oh, okay, got
Lightroom,
it.
eventually,
All right.
yeah.
Luminar
If you
has,
want immediate gratification, Luminar is.
and all the Adobe products are expensive. There are very good alternatives. For example, if you want an alternative to Photoshop, Affinity Photo is excellent.
Affinity?
Affinity
Okay.
Photo. And it's about $60 or $70. It's very affordable.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This is helpful.
The Luminar lets you do more with less. You get the most with the least effort.
And you can use layers.
Got it.
Mark, can I ask you a question? What are you using now?
I'm embarrassed. I'm using Microsoft.
Okay, so can I suggest one thing? I really like Luminar, and it's a really good way to get your feet wet.
Okay.
Before you go into the scary Adobe universe.
I like that idea. Yeah.
There is a first step that I recommend that our IT guy recommended to us 20 years ago, and it's still valid, and they update it all the time. It's called graphic converter. So there are 2 C's there, graphic converter. And you can Google it. It's a product that is made by a guy in Germany. So if you have any problems, you can actually email him, and he will answer you like in hours and walk you through whatever you need. It's amazing. And there are things that you can do on Graphic Converter in 5 minutes that will take you an hour on Photoshop.
Oh,
so
wow.
I highly recommend that. Nobody else has ever heard of this, but
I've used Graphic Converter for years and years.
Yes.
And it is the workhorse when you can't get something done like converting obscure files from one to another.
Yes.
It's like have it in your toolkit for when you can't figure something else, throw Graphic Converter at it and you can probably do it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. You're the only one I have ever met that actually has used Graphic Converter.
Gary and I have also used it for years, Ronnie. So we're the same.
Excellent, Nancy. And it's $39. You can't go wrong.
And Gary communicates with the guy. So yes, I agree.
Tony, I have a question.
Yeah.
So after you've gathered everything up and you've checked all the variables that you mentioned so well, and you're looking at a scene that has grabbed your interest, what do you look for as to balance?
The balance?
The balance within your scene that you're looking at to photograph.
You know, I try not to look at that at all until I get back in front of my monitor because I feel I'm going to be much more objective.
Oh,
I shoot everything wide because it's much easier to crop than it is to create.
Interesting.
And if you're following that rule, you need the largest, most dense sensor you can afford. If when you crop a small area, you're still going to have resolution worthy of a sharp picture.
You're absolutely right. Sometimes I'll go from wide to macro, but most of the time when I'm shooting landscape, I'm in a situation where I'm doing a bunch of different setups and I may shoot wide, or sometimes I won't, or sometimes I'll do both. But I want to have enough of each size so that it's easy for me to index my images if I'm going to use them in layers.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you do not compose in the field, you compose in the post-processing.
That's pretty true. My concern is nature never slows down. Animals never slow down. And I'm trying in a relatively short amount of time to gather as much information as I can so that when I get home, I'm going to be able to go, I wonder if I have one that's like this.
Thank you.
I have, or just a little postscript on that. One of my favorite guys to shoot with shot film for years. And in the beginning, when he got his first DSLR, he would stand and maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, he would compose and get everything absolutely right. And as a result, he might come back at the end of the day and have taken 20, 25 shots. And I had, add another 0 at least. And I might not have the exact expertise that he did in terms of getting it absolutely perfect in the field, but I had stuff that was close enough and I had more versions of it, and I felt that was worth it. It's just a different philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Nice to have a large toolkit.
Yeah. And I also loved when we first used to go out together shooting to set my bracket to 5 or 7 and be fairly close to them and just keep clicking away. I wasn't really trying to take pictures. I was trying to drive them nuts.
Well, you sound fun.
I hope you have your beep on for focus.
Oh, I have a bell.
Oh my gosh.
I have just one more question. I'm sure, like most of us, you have a lot of different lenses. Do you have a go-to lens that you usually
Good question.
stick with?
I went from 2003 with Canon up until 2 years ago. And then I went with Lumix for a short period of time. And then I switched completely over to Sony. I kept some of the lenses I had from Canon that I didn't care about autofocus. So I kept a fisheye. I kept a macro for shooting pictures, flowers, and I kept a lens baby. I have typically only 3 lenses. I have a wide angle, a walk around, and a telephoto. Those are usually the only 3 lenses I carry with me all the time. So I repack my backpack every time I go out.
Here's a bit of advice that I wish someone had given me early on before I invested in a lot, and that is you can rent the equipment.
Yes.
Rent a few things, try them out, go out and shoot, find which lenses you like, which ones you don't, which camera bodies you like. And after that, then consider buying.
Oh,
You raised an excellent point, and the height of stupidity for me was I earn most of my money with one client shooting meetings, architectural stuff, and some scenics. And I always took a backup camera with me. I'd have a Mark III and a Mark IV Canon with me. And when I switched over to Sony, someone gave me the advice, and it was sort of like a Homer Simpson Dole moment of, okay, if you have a Sony, how about renting a second one for the time you need it? So that's what I did.
Isn't it 4 lenses or something? Or at Jeremiah's you could get that?
I can't remember the name of the company I work with. They're
I use borrow lenses.
Borrow lenses.
oh, it's Lens to Go.
Oh,
And they're wonderful in terms of the camera arriving the day before you need it, and then you just, drop it off at UPS afterwards, and you're done.
By the way, Shutterbug rents cameras and lenses too. I've rented from them.
Great.
I'm gonna bow out, but thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.
Excellent.
Thank
Any
you
other-
very much.
Yeah,
Oh, you're
thanks so
welcome.
much.
Love
Thank
your
you. Loved it.
philosophy. Yeah.
If you have any further questions, you know where I live.
Thanks, Tony.
Good job, Tony. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for hosting.
Yes,
thanks,
thank you,
Steve.
Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Night all.
Night.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Good night, John Boy.